everybody for attending the Abe Lincoln virtual award ceremony last week. We gave out a total of $44,600 in Abe Lincoln Scholarship Awards this year. I think our MC did another fantastic job. It's nice to have him wrapped in, nice to have Rafael Sanchez roped in. Please join us next week for Nate Feldman, the CEO of the IBJ, March 18th. Infamous Mayor Brainerd from Carmel. And then we move into baseball season with Howard Kellman and kind of go on from there. And the board's considering getting back in person for one meeting a month in April. The vaccines are moving along. I hear we're down to age 50. So our at-risk population will have those vaccines at their disposal. So we'll ease into getting back together in person. And again, the board will vote on that coming up. So Kiwanis International is launching a leadership series. We'll put that link in the chat. That starts April 1st for $200 a person. Please consider donating your lunch money to the PayPal link. I think that's a nice, convenient way to support the foundation. See the weekly email for our link to the book drive. Thanks for the help with the PowerPoint, Trina. As you know, we are seeking a full-time operations manager. More information can be found on our website and in the newsletter. Please feel free to share the information with any qualified candidates on your social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Snapchat pages. That being said, turn it over to Mr. Jason Burke, who has some information on our East scholarships.
Hey, everybody. Can you hear me? Good. I did if you remember a while back, probably a year and a half ago, COCODA, the not-for-profit or nonprofit organization that Jim Mulholland runs as the executive director, had their fundraiser last week, and I spent 4 nights on Zoom doing the production for the video, and it was very useful. It was nice to have somebody behind the scenes doing that, because I've never done a lot of Zoom stuff, but when you're talking and trying to share screens, I'm in this ACE mentor thing too, that it's just so complicated to do. And I can now very much appreciate everybody who does it flawlessly. But I've spent a lot of time on Zoom, and I just learned, after having been on this stupid platform for a year, that in order to share a screen with video, or I'm sorry, with audio, there's 2 tiny little check boxes at the bottom that you have to check. And if you don't check those, it will not work and frustrate you to death. So figured that out last week. It was fantastic. Anyway, the reason I'm speaking today is I'm doing a call out for the East Scholarship interviewers. I've got the applications into University of Indianapolis and Butler, and I know the dates that we're going to be doing the interviews. If you are interested in being an interviewer, please contact me via email or phone, and I'll put you on the list, and I'll get some dates out there for folks. You can do both sessions, one session or the other. It's sometime in beginning mid to mid-April, and it's a fantastic opportunity to see some really great kids come through their programs. And no offense to anyone who's done it the past couple of years, but at least in the beginning, if I can get some new people, that would be cool. I would be more than happy to have some of the folks that have done it before be a part of it as well if need be, but just trying to spread the love a little. So that's my spiel. Let me know if you're interested. Thanks very much.
And then Jason, what will the time commitment be?
Good question. Roughly 2.5 hours each session, and a little bit of pre-planning just to talk through Zoom and make sure it all works properly. So 2 different evenings, probably 3 different evenings, a couple hours each time. That's the maximum, really.
All right, thank you, Jason. And I'm gonna turn it over to Mr. Jay Brill, who is doing a good job leading the inner clubs with the same enthusiasm as our favorite deceased, Mr. Marbaugh. But no, Jay, if you could speak on what's going on in the coming weeks, noticeably our Tokyo Inner Club.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But on March the 22nd, we're going to have an inner club at 12 o'clock with the Augusta Club, and it's going to be on the Masters. They're going to have two speakers talk to us about the Masters tournament coming up. And then to reciprocate, Greg Fennick is helping us to, get Doug Boyles involved to give a presentation on the Indianapolis 500. And what we plan to do is open that up to clubs around the United States and see how many clubs we can have join us for an interclub. And now we have really exciting news coming up in April. And Taka, are you on the line that you can talk about our interclub program for April? I guess Taka's not here. I was hoping that he would have an opportunity to kind of tell you himself what he's arranged. And he's arranged an interclub, and they're working down the dates right now, sometime in August. And you should hear the information in, or see the information in your newsletter. It's the interclub is going to be, they meet at 12 noon, but in order for us to get involved with their meeting, we're going to have to log in at 11 o'clock the evening before. So it should be a lot of fun. We have it set up so that there's quite a number of members of the Tokyo Club that can speak English, and Taka has kind of put together a program where we can kind of share information about each club, what we're doing, their community, their service projects, how they're dealing with COVID. So that's kind of exciting, and we look forward to doing that. And we're going to reach out to Jeff Otis and see if Jeff can help us publicize this and get other clubs around the United States to attend the interclub as well. So that's what we have going on for now.
All right, thanks, Jay. And I think from the KI perspective, I think how that logistically would work is Jeff would provide us the contact details for us to reach out. Jeff's told me repeatedly, as I've harassed him repeatedly, that KI doesn't get involved in the promotion of individual club projects, but we could get the logistics from him to reach out ourselves. And Taka actually gave me a date for April 23rd. So Jay, Mrs. Brill told me that you're going to host a sake party for the 11 p.m. interclub. So we'll see you in West Carmel for Thursday, 11 p.m. Tokyo Interclub, April 22nd, 11 p.m. But no, so that being said, in all seriousness, thanks, Jay, for pursuing this and stay on top of it and exploring exciting options for us. I'm going to turn it over to Miss Trina Raudebush, who will introduce today's speakers. Recently published authors, Mr. Graham Honaker, Jerry Logan, The Cinderella Strategy. That's a beautiful basketball, Mrs. Mary Marsh. I'll turn it over to Trina.
Thanks, Eric. I wanted to share this incredible gift from Mary to Graham, and she said she had been searching for a home for it for a while, and really found its perfect home with Graham. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. In 2010, Butler University's men's basketball team made a stunning run for the national championship game, becoming the smallest school to make the finals in the modern history of the NCAA tournament. In 2011, they did it again. With back-to-back runs turned America's favorite underdog, Butler basketball, provided the university back home in Indianapolis with an unprecedented opportunity. The Cinderella Strategy details how Butler started its move toward the Final Fours as far back as 1989, forged the synergy between big-time athletics program and serious academic institution in the process, and then leveraged the Cinderella story that came from it for all that it was worth. The authors, Graham Honaker and Jerry Logan, join us today to share a little about their work uncovering how the university took full advantage of this opportunity to shatter the odds time and time again, both on the court and off. Their work offers a heartening case study of how a complex organization can find, manage, and multiply success without having to trade its soul in the process. Jerry Logan is the Director of Academic Operations and a lecturer in the Recreation, Sports, and Wellness program at Gordon College in Massachusetts. He holds a PhD in higher education from Boston College and a Master's of Ed in Higher Education Administration from the College of William and Mary. Graham Honaker, who some of you may know, serves as the Executive Director of Principal Gifts at Butler University. He has worked on various campaigns at Butler, including the Campaign for Hinkle Fieldhouse and the Butler Beyond campaign. He serves on the boards of the Milan 54 Hoosier Museum and Project 44, and is a trustee of the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership. He's also a past president of our club. Without further ado, the court is yours, boys.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Trina. We'll talk in a few minutes about how Trina had a great hand in this book. Really honored to be with you today. Jerry and I have been doing these for about 3 months, and we've done a lot of Kiwanis clubs all over the state. We've got one coming up in Boston, and I'll probably get kicked out of the club, but we've also done a number for Rotary, for some Rotary organizations as well. So please forgive me. For those who don't know, Rotary is our arch enemy. They're our Xavier, our Xavier for those Butler fans who know we've got a rival. But I'm really honored to be with you today. Before I started, I've told a couple of you this, entering my 9th year here at Butler in Indianapolis. Being in this club has been one of the highlights of my time here. I remember reaching out to Brad Boyd and saying I had been in a club in Louisville and I'd be honored to join. And we just have outstanding people in this club, and I really value that. Jerry, who I'll introduce in a minute, his avenue into the story. What we're going to do today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the genesis behind the book, how it got started. Jerry's going to dial you back a few decades in history and talk about where this story began, that it didn't just start with those 2 Final Fours. I'll talk about really the transformational impact of the Final Fours and what they've had on the university. And then the book, which is exciting. I got my author copies 2 days ago and it's starting to ship out. Rotarians can read, I like that. The book is really built around 12 leadership principles, and we'll share 3 or 4 of those with you and then take questions at the end. So what were my motivations behind the book? Speaking of reading and writing, I wanted to prove to people I could read and write. My mom's on the call here today. I was hoping to get somebody here who I know would enjoy the presentation, and at points in my life that might have been in jeopardy, that thought that I could do those. But I'd always dreamt of writing a book. And every year at Butler, since I've been here, I kept seeing this phenomenal growth at the university. Facility growth, application growth, fundraising growth, moved to the Big East. And I thought, I'm biased, but this is really a unique story. And I want to start capturing this, if nothing else, for my own personal memories. In 2017, my co-author, Jerry Logan, who's been an incredible privilege writing this book, he had no tie to Butler. He was getting his PhD at Boston College, and his dissertation was on the catalytic impact that athletic success can have on a university. And he chose Butler for his dissertation. He came to campus, interviewed about 25 of us. We hit it off. We were both basketball junkies and stayed in touch. He sent me his dissertation, and it was about this time last year. Hard to believe we're about a year into the pandemic. The pandemic broke. I knew I wasn't going to go into the office for a while, and I called him and I said, I'm going to have more time on my hands. My wife hates it when I have time on my hands. She knows I'm not very good, and I go stir crazy. And what if we took my work and yours and started down the avenue of a book? At that time it was a dream. It's hard to get a book published, but we really started cranking, working every day. And by the fall, we thought we had a really good manuscript in place. The challenge was selling it to a publisher. I equate it to my dating life in college, where I got a lot of rejections and a lot of unreturned phone calls. But we finally had a publisher, Pediment Publishing, who took a chance on us. and they've published the book. And I'm gonna put 2 links in the chat. One is from Pediment Publishing, where you can buy the book at a discounted price. The other one is from Barnes and Nobles, and it's $4 more. But if you order through Barnes and Nobles, we're really hoping that it gets in stores. So if you let me know you order it through Barnes and Nobles, I'll donate that $5 back to our club foundation. So we're hoping to see it in stores. Anyway, though, a couple more motivations. Butler has achieved this ascent in a really difficult time for higher education. You know, unfortunately, we've seen schools close. We saw St. Joseph's close up in Rensselaer. Schools have been hit with, and this was before the pandemic, financial issues, application issues. The population of college-age students is declining. So I thought it was a unique story that Butler's done this in a really difficult time. And we hope the book may provide a source of optimism for other small schools who may not go to back-to-back Final Fours, but can take some of the principles here and apply them to their own situation. Secondly, if you're a college basketball fan, this has been a little bit of a dark cloud over college basketball this last decade. There have been some programs, notable programs, I won't mention names, but Kansas, NC State, Louisville, who have really been under a pretty serious investigation by the NCAA. And we thought, we're not perfect here at Butler. We're close, but we're not perfect, but we felt this is a program that's doing it the right way. Our student athletes go to class, they graduate, they actually come here for an academic experience. If they don't, they're not here very long, but also we felt it was a program that's done it the right way. If the NCAA they haven't knocked at our door, but if they wanted to, it'd be pretty easy because we're the closest school in the country to the NCAA headquarters. So that was a motivation. And then finally, I'm a student of books on leadership, culture, strategy. You can find a lot of them in your bookstores on how Southwest Airlines and Marriott and Starbucks do things. You're very hard pressed to find a book on a university. Where can I learn from a university and take some of the things that they've done? We're often looked at, as dinosaurs here in higher education, but my biases aside, I think we've done some really innovative things and have leveraged those 2 Final Fours for all they're worth. So those were the motivations. I'll put these links in the chat. I'm going to turn it over to my friend and co-author. And by the way, we've not been in the same room writing this book. We've done it all via phone and Zoom, but a great guy, really talented writer, Jerry Logan.
Thanks, Graham. It's a pleasure to be with you all this afternoon. Thanks to Trina, too, for the lovely introduction and also for so much behind the scenes help. I just remember an email I got from Graham that was from Trina. That was basically like, you should probably tweet this, this, and this, and you might want to do it like this. And I just thought, oh my gosh, yes, I should. I need so much help on the socials, as they say. And so little things, big things like reading drafts and just the constant support. We're super grateful. And I would just like to acknowledge that publicly and say thank you, Trina, for all of the help. I'm gonna try to share my screen here and work up a little PowerPoint. Is that coming through okay? Awesome. Well, as Graham mentioned, I kind of came to Butler from a very different angle than he did. I kind of came intellectually. I was working on my dissertation and I had a topic I was excited about, and in part because it involved basketball. And I had found a way to weasel athletics into an academic study, and I was really excited about that. The part that got me really excited was reading about schools like George Mason, Gonzaga, Davidson, that had had a run through March. They had told some kind of Cinderella story with their own feature, and it had become valuable to the university. It become an opportunity for the university to get its name out there, to become better known, to publicize what they were doing on the ground and wherever their location was. So I got excited about March Madness, not as a billion-dollar enterprise, but as a kind of attention lottery, where schools have invested in men's basketball programs, And they know there's this 3-week period where lots of eyeballs are going to be on this one thing across the country. And if they can get a little lucky, the ball bounces the right way a few times. So-and-so has a good game on a random day. All of a sudden, everyone's paying attention. And it's an enormous opportunity for the university. That's how I kind of came to Butler. I wanted to see what had happened there after those 2 Final Four runs. They got this unprecedented opportunity. How did they cash in on it? How did they try to keep the magic alive? But in exploring that question, kind of got thrown backwards. The very first call I had was with Barry Collier, who's the athletic director. And I kind of floated this idea. And he said, oh yeah, that started way back in 1989, as Trina mentioned. And everyone I talked to in those initial conversations said the same thing. There was a really clear starting point for this story. And it's very much, in some ways, a rags to riches story. Rags is a little bit the wrong word. Butler was a great university. It's just that people didn't know. They had wonderful programs in dance and pharmacy, but outside of Indianapolis, they weren't that well known. And so Jeff Bannister became president in 1989, the same year that Barry Collier became head coach in the men's basketball program. And across campus, they started to engineer this turnaround. A few of the problems they had, there was the image problem I mentioned. Butler wasn't that well known outside of the area, despite having many things they ought to be well known for. Really strong programs, really strong community. Public relations, weak and unimaginative, not our words, but in strategic plans from the time. It said, we're not doing this too well. They had a campus that was a drive-through campus, felt like a commuter school, not a place you want to stick around. And perhaps most importantly, for the Bannister strategy, they had a men's basketball program that was kind of falling on the skids. Barry's first year there, they won 6 games. There's a wonderful data point in David Woods' book, Underdogs, where that first season, there were a lot of season ticket holders who got their tickets on the house. There were only 15 who actually paid for them. So more than double the number of people on this call that Butler had season ticket holders that year, which is just astonishing to think about. That was not that long ago. And of course, they were season ticket holders in this wonderful, beautiful, enormous field house, historic, legendary, that was also kind of falling on the skids. When Hoosiers, the film crew, came through to tape the climactic scenes for the movie, it was 1985, and they were shooting and telling a story that was set in 1954, and they came to the field house, looked around, said, well, we don't need to change anything. This looks 30 years old. That was the type of facility that they were trying to resuscitate too. But Jeff Bannister was sharp. He said, hey, basketball seems to matter in Indiana. He was from New Zealand, not a basketball person, but he understood the relationship of people and place and what basketball meant in Indiana. He said, we have this enormous resource here in the field house. So 1989 was that moment when they started to try to turn things around. They did that, as I mentioned, by hiring Barry Collier over the course of 11 seasons there. They started to win some basketball games, started to knock on the tournament door. Barry went away and came back as athletic director. And at that point, he identified another problem, which was, hey, men's basketball is starting to do pretty well, but the unit above it, the athletic department, we're kind of striking out there. The reason he knew this was because they would administer the kind of repeat customer question when student athletes graduated and finished at Butler. And they'd say, hey, if you had 4 years to do this all over again, would you? And only 50% of student athletes said, yes, I'd come back to Butler if I could do it all over again. And 2 years running, that was the data point. So Barry looked at that and said, this is a problem. Maybe men's basketball is doing all right, but the rest of the unit is not. This is not good. We're not doing well by our student athletes. So he made some really hard decisions to kind of work the kinks out of this next unit above in the organization. He cut a couple sports. He raised those ticket prices, made people start paying them, moved the media from the courtside seats, put in courtside seats for fans. All of these were difficult changes, not necessarily popular, but they were essential over the long run in getting that athletic department and student athlete experience where it ought to be. Finally, we kind of tell the story of how Butler found an alignment between its athletic department and the university as a whole. And we tell that through the lens of 3 successive presidents, where Butler with Jeff Bannister had a risk taker at the helm. And then they kind of swung to more of a stabilizing presence in Bobby Fong. And then in 2011, when they were making that second Final Four run, they were also searching for their next president. And so they were asking candidates, hey, look what's going on here. This is kind of a big deal. We just went to the national championship game. We're doing it again. What would you do with this opportunity? And the person who won the job, Jim Danko, who is still the president, said, you got to go big or go home. It's a season of risk taking again. They must have liked that response and many others, I'm sure, that President Danko gave, because they hired him and set off an enormously transformational decade that I will now kick it over to Graham to talk about.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. So Butler goes to these back-to-back Final Fours in 2010 and 2011. By the way, the picture of the ball that Mary and John gave me is a signed ball from the 2010 team, which was an amazing addition to my office, and I'm deeply grateful. The only negative is my wife found out about it and said, yeah, you probably won't be getting a birthday or Christmas gift for the next 5 years, because I know how important a gift that is to you. But really grateful there. So Butler goes to these two Final Fours, and we have a company, Borshoff Media Group, who evaluates what those two Final Fours meant. And they estimated that they got 1.2 billion with a B in earned media recognition. So in other words, you'd have to pay an advertiser or marketer 1.2 billion to get that kind of attention. My comparison for a number of years is that it's like the family that wins the Powerball. Your life changes overnight. And I don't mean to say it was all luck, because there's lots of hard work that went into that. But you win the Powerball and your life changes, right? But now you've got to make a decision on what you're going to do with the money, what you're going to do with the capital and the attention. But at the same time, it was important to Butler to not lose their identity in the process. We've seen what money, power, and fame does to people. And so that's a risk, right? And there was some concern, from some of the faculty staff that, boy, this could really change us. This could really change who we are. So next slide there, Jerry. So again, moving forward, a lot of strategic decisions. The first big domino to fall is that Butler is invited to the Big East Conference. And if you're not familiar with the Big East, you've got great schools like Georgetown, Villanova, St. John's, Providence, maybe one exception to the great school rule, and Xavier. So you have this, really top-notch basketball conference, but you're now moving in. I hope no one went to Xavier on this call, by the way. You're moving into this conference with some really prestigious academic schools. So this is a big deal. And it's pretty well known Butler would not have been invited into the Big East without those two Final Fours happening. So they were really key to getting us in the conference, but also exposing us to new markets. We'll talk about the rise in applications here in a minute, but we started having more students coming from, DC and Philadelphia and New York and Boston. By the way, we have a couple great Butler people, and Susan Jensen, Chris Shinkman, and Francisco Miras, who are on the call from those areas. And I think they could tell you how not only did Butler join the conference, but name recognition really grew in those areas. So this was a big deal, and you could argue the move to the Big East is ultimately a more sustainable impact. The Final Fours will perhaps fade over time, but as for the foreseeable future and hopefully decades, we're going to be in that Big East Conference. Three other, we call them net gains, enrollment and applications. When I started at Butler in 2012, we were getting about 6,600 applications. 2 years ago, we had 17,000. Last year, I think we had upwards of 15,000. And again, this is in a time that applications have been falling for smaller private liberal arts schools. Again, that demographic, when I started, we had about 60% of the income of the population of the school, student-wise, in-state, 40% out-of-state. That's completely flipped. And again, a big part of that was the notoriety that Butler gained. Applications jumped 44% after the first Final Four. And you'd think, boy, that could go away, that halo effect could evaporate. It's still going. Last fall, in the midst of a pandemic, we enrolled the third largest class at Butler. Recently got a report on our applications for next year, and we're ahead of schedule, if you can think about it. That's a really great sign for Butler, but one that you can't take for granted. So application's a huge impact. Next slide. Philanthropy. I always say, that's what I do, and I should be sending a thank you note to those basketball teams every week because they've made my job a lot easier. Our endowment has grown $100 million. By the way, Jerry doesn't know this, but I saw there are already some comments on Amazon, and someone said, well, that's lazy research because that just trended with the stock market over the S&P over the last 10 years, but it's not true. We received 2 gifts from a couple entities totaling $30 million that all went to endowment. Those gifts would not have happened. I can tell you that without those donors' rise in respect and recognition of Butler. But philanthropy, 2000 to 2010, there were 3 gifts of $1 million or more pledges from families. This past decade, we've had 22 of those. Our largest gift ever came in 2016 from a former Kiwanian in Andre Lacey, who again, as probably most of you know, didn't go to Butler, wife didn't go to Butler, kids didn't go to Butler. Why did he make that gift? A big part of it, he was really proud of the ascent of the university. And he felt Butler's values aligned with his. And then finally, infrastructure. We've added 1.2 million square feet. A lot of you toured our business school building a year and a half ago. That, new residence halls, we're working on a science complex. We put $45 million in the Hinkle. So the next time the directors of Hoosiers come and see us, they won't make the comment that they don't need to do, if they do a sequel to Hoosiers, they don't need to make the comment that we don't need to do anything because the gym looks like 1954. I think you've been in it recently. It's gotten a nice facelift, but infrastructure. And again, I can tell you, I gave a tour about a year and a half ago when it opened, and Matt Howard, one of the stars of the Butler teams, was in the tour. And I said, I want to thank Matt because without he and his teams, we wouldn't have been able to build this. And I really believe that. We're going to wrap up. Again, we've got about 12 principles in the book. We're just going to share 4 of them here with you that, again, we think can be applied to about any organization. Basketball is the foundation for the book, but we think there are lessons that can be learned and applied to about any organization. So Jerry's going to kick it off with the first 2. I'll finish, and then we'll take questions.
Thanks, Graham. Just a couple of quick hitters here, things that really stood out to me as I got to know Butler's story a little bit better. The first one, I think, stood out to me, especially because I work in higher education and we do everything by committee. We choose lunch together as a group. It takes us hours to come to a consensus. So it really stood out to me when I started asking about how Butler hires men's basketball coaches, and learned it's just Barry Collier, just one person. I had a trustee tell us it's in Barry we trust. And that really stood out to me. It's kind of counterintuitive at first because it seems like that's not much of a team play. But I think when I started to think about basketball, especially even in the NBA, which features a lot of isolation play, give the ball to the best player, get out of the way, that in the right context, that's a really unselfish team play to say someone's good at this. We need to give that person space to do what they do best. And I think Butler has done that and navigated a thing that tends to sink a lot of Cinderella institutions, which is the head coach moves on. I think you could look at George Mason, even VCU, which has still been good, but doesn't quite have that pop that they used to have once the head coach has left. Butler has navigated those ups and downs remarkably well, and they've done it with a hiring practice that is a bit counterintuitive, at least to me. The second and related one, again, talking to Barry Collier and asking, hey, what's different about Butler? What's the part of the story that no one's talking about? He said one word, it's patience. So finding that this was a long story that involved work and effort day in and day out to commit to the student experience, to recruit to teams and to openings at presidency and staff and faculty, where people understood that the student experience, and especially in the classroom, but also in the athletic fields and courts, is paramount took a lot of patience waiting for that to pay off, and took more patience once those Final Fours hit and there were the temptations to go bigger, to do things differently, to stick to that strategy. And I found that really remarkable. And you can see signs of it all over the place. I think even the fact that Butler's 3 past presidents, there was an interim president for a year, but from Bannister to Fong to Danko, all of them have outstayed the average tenure for a college and university president, which is 6.5 years. And at Butler, they do decades. So I think the marks of patience are all over Butler. And I find that to be a very encouraging sign of life, especially when it seems the temptation is always to move faster, to make knee-jerk decisions, particularly in areas like college basketball where the results are so obvious, wins and losses, we all see them. So to commit to patience in those areas, I think is a remarkable part of the Butler story that demands kind of full voice. Over to you, Graham.
So the next strategy point here, there's a broad base we're trying to appeal to. This may apply more to people in sales or with what I do in fundraising, but most of you know that's Andre Lacey. That was the day of the gift announcement when we announced the $25 million gift from the Laceys, which, by the way, I really put my foot in my mouth a couple of years ago. I was out with my wife at dinner and she asked me what have been the best days of your life? And I led off with that gift announcement that day. I probably should have started with our wedding and the birth of the children, but really impactful day at Butler. And Mr. Lacey, again, didn't go to Butler University. He went to Denison. Julia didn't go to Butler. Kids didn't go to Butler. So he was asked many times after that announcement, why'd you give $25 million to Butler? And consistently he responded, well, they asked me. And I think that's a great reminder, not just if you're in sales or fundraising, but whatever you're trying to achieve, if at the end of the day you don't make the ask and have the courage to ask, you'll never know. By the way, President Danko was speaking to a board the following week and said, yeah, I think somebody at Denison University is in trouble this week. So final lesson here, complacency is the enemy of innovation. One of the things I'm really proud about at Butler is since those Final Fours, we worked harder than ever to not just leverage the success, but think about how we can innovate, because higher education is very competitive. It's changing fast. We're not just competing against other universities. We're now competing against online educators like the Khan Academy, and Amazon and their constant pursuit of dominating the world is rumored to go into full-time education as well. But we've done a lot of innovating from here. We started an innovation fund back when President Danko started to invest in unique ideas here at Butler. We recently had a $2.5 million gift from the Lilly Foundation, where we're going to be investing in higher education technologies. I even say it's innovative what we've done with our bulldog, our mascot. I wish we had our picture here, but a couple of years ago, made the decision, rather than a prospective student getting your acceptance letter in the mail, what if we had it delivered by a paw delivered by a 4-legged bulldog? Would that make an impact on your decision to come to Butler? And we've seen a big jump in that. So again, I think that's something that's unique, innovative, and I think something that applies to every organization. If you look at us in Kiwanis, we're trying to figure out how we can evolve to attract different generations. And I think we're doing that right now. So again, there's about 8 more strategy points in the book. If you choose to buy it, you can read those other 8. Wrapping up, and then we'll take questions. We've been really blessed to have a lot of great testimonials. Probably get in trouble with a few of you Butler fans, but Mike Krzyzewski gave us a great endorsement. Val Ackerman, Commissioner of the Big East, Adam Grant, thought leader in higher education. Greg Popovich, there's a really neat story about Greg Popovich in the book. So we've had about 17 or 18 testimonials, really been blessed there. So the book, again, this is the first week it's starting to ship. Available Pediment Publishing, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. We've got a Twitter account and a website. Final thing, many of you know about Project 44. We gave a grant to Project 44 last year, but we had a really terrific player on those teams, Final Four teams, named Andrew Smith, who very sadly contracted leukemia at the age of 24, passed away at the age of 25. And we're donating some of the proceeds to Project 44. Their mission is to save 44 lives through bone marrow transplant and registry. So again, really honored to speak with you today. I'd also be remiss if there are a number of people on this call. A final motivation was to honor so many people at Butler who have really been the heroes of this book. And I look at the Marshes, Bill Du Bois, I don't know if he's on here, but Susan Jensen, and Dr. Shinkman, and Gary Gardner, and Greg Silver. And again, I'm going to miss some names. My mom for making this book possible by having me. So again, we wanted to pay homage to all of these people. You know, Brad Stevens, Barry Collier, the presidents, they're the ones that get a lot of the attention, but this is a story that thousands have contributed to, and we think it's a great story, and we hope it will be well received. We'll soon find out. So thank you for having us, and I think Trina's going to read some questions here for us.
Thank you, guys. Feel free to drop questions in the chat. I've read the book 3 times already, and I keep checking my mailroom to see if the hard copies have come. So it's worth putting your hands on, putting your eyes on. I know I don't stack up with the endorsements that you have listed there, but you have mine. Jerry, the first question for you, how did you decide of all of the possible programs and schools that have had high levels of success or capitalized on Cinderella stories, how did you decide Butler was the one to focus on for your dissertation?
That's a really good question. Whoever asked that, thanks so much, because I love to talk about this. I had a whole spreadsheet of different variables that I thought would make for the most interesting case study. I knew I was a grad student. I knew I could only do one. So I didn't have the resources or the time to get to multiple institutions, which I really would have loved to have done. So I had to pick one. And so I wanted one, for instance, that was recent enough memory that people were still there. I could still go talk to folks who had lived it and experienced it. But I also wanted it to be distant enough that we could kind of get a sense for the fallout. What'd you actually do? What kind of opportunities arose? So I didn't want it to be so recent that people were still just trying to make sense of what was even going on. So Butler kind of landed right in that sweet spot. I also wanted a place that had room for growth. So for instance, VCU was the other one. When I came down to 2 finalists, they were the other one on the list. I just made this column with a bunch of different factors and started circling things, and all the circles fell on Butler's side. I wanted a source of continuity. So I saw Barry Collier had kind of lived through this whole thing. Well, that's a check mark for Butler. VCU is a huge research one. I didn't know what kind of growth they could do building off of this. And I wanted a place like Butler that was smaller and could get bigger or could do more or that sort of thing. I wanted a place that the name wasn't in the name of the university. So Virginia Commonwealth, like, well, people know where that is. It's in Virginia. Butler kind of had all those little check boxes for me. So that was why I chose them.
Perfect, thank you. Back to kind of the publishing of the book and the timeline that you guys worked on, how significant is the NCAA tournament this month and being in Indy? Did that factor in to you guys, to your work, to your strategy on publishing?
Yeah, so again, when I was getting rejection after rejection in the fall on this project, ironically around the, I guess, what was it, Jerry, maybe September-ish, finally had a publisher interested, and then we had a literary agent from New York interested. And we were trying to decide the best route to go. The literary agent had some really strong connections with some big time publishers, which he couldn't guarantee that it would get out in March. Pediment could guarantee that. And that was a big deal for us, not just for March, but this ties in with the 10-year anniversary of the 2 Final Fours. So that was a huge deal for us. And we didn't know at the time, obviously, that the tournament was going to be held here in its entirety. So the 10-year factor was really, really huge for us in terms of the timeline here. But it made it, we got put under the crunch because when we were doing the edits, it's like, gosh, we better be on time or this book will not get out on time.
Thanks. Greg Silver asked about the importance of the recent NBC national game for recruiting and enrollment as we played Villanova this past weekend. Maybe taking a broader view of that, how has, especially with the shift to the Big East and the media attention that comes with that, how has the spotlight impacted?
Well, I'll sure say that Villanova game was great for my mental health. Awesome day in Hinkle. Really good question, though, the broader question. Now, if you live in Phoenix, Arizona, or DC area where Susan is, or I think my good friend Stephanie Olmstead's on the call from New York City, now you get the majority of these games on television. And not only do the Butler fans enjoy them, prospective high school students thinking about Butler in Los Angeles or New York or DC or wherever it is can see the majority of these games. Now our alumni clubs in these cities can get together more to watch these games. But been huge for the notoriety, and it doesn't hurt that I think our cut of the Big East, contract, I believe it's about $3 million a year we're getting. That hasn't trickled down to staff salaries yet. I'm waiting for it too. But, that's a big deal that, again, even in the mid 2000s, Butler was having to pay to get some of their games on TV. I mean, think about how far that's gone in 16 years, right? But that's been an enormous fallout of joining the Big East.
You try to apply a lot of the lessons learned on the court and in the locker room to organizations at large. And Chris Shinkman asked a really good question that if we can look at it through an organizational lens. He asked, given the success of the basketball program, has the Butler head football coach ever asked, why not me and my program? And this may harken back to the 80s or even before.
Jerry, you want to talk about the football point that we make in the book?
Sure. Outsider's perspective here. Don't know much about Butler football. Big Ohio State fan, so know a lot about big time college football. And I know that only about 5 or 6 schools really win in big time college football. It's an enormous expenditure that especially, you're seeing it now when you can't have home games with 60,000, 80,000, 100,000 people, what that does to an athletic department. So I think Butler, looking backward, that the really outside of the box solution to do the Pioneer League, which is we want to keep Division I football, but we don't see the long-term fruits of investing in scholarship football and what that means for the university as a whole. That decision, I think they're still reaping rewards from the wisdom of that decision. And to say, in particular, basketball is just offers some of the same benefits, maybe not perhaps on the scale, but it's a much more equal playing field. You just don't see teams break through in college football like you do in men's basketball. And you're going to see it again this March. Someone else is going to do it. And it just happens annually. And you only need to have 15 scholarships and you just need shoes, right? And of course, you need facilities, but Hinkle's a facility for everyone. So I think the financial prudence of investing in men's and women's basketball, or in some other parts of the country, other sports might make sense, like ice hockey does in certain regions, really has benefited Butler. And I know from what I've heard that it was a difficult decision to do that with football, and it didn't make everyone happy. But I would wonder how they feel about it now that you're 30, 40 years removed from making that hard decision, what it looks like.
One other important point is that all of the sports have benefited from men's basketball success. Examples being when we put $45 million into Hinkle, almost every sport has either an office or locker room in Hinkle. So all of those spaces got upgraded. We got a brand new weight room that all of the athletes use. There's an academic facility now in Hinkle that all of the athletes use. Our volleyball coach talks about in the book that now when she goes to Texas to recruit, the families usually are aware of where Butler is, and she's been here 20 years and she can't always say that. Our softball coach talks about now with more revenue coming in, that they can fly more, and that the students don't miss as much class because they can fly more. So really all of the athletics programs have reaped the reward of the men's basketball success.
I'll ask a follow-up to that. Graham, you'll probably want to field this one. So not only potential divisiveness between sports when attention is put on to one, but thinking academics and athletics at Butler, they work so well together and they rise together. How was that possible? How did that come to be?
I think it's a real credit to the leadership here. Shared goals, shared vision, shared culture. It doesn't always work like that. I think we're probably an anomaly. You know, with what I do with fundraising, I usually visit a couple of universities every year to learn from them. In a well-known university in the Southeast, who I won't mention their name, I met with my colleague there who works in athletics. And I said, what's your philosophy in balancing the academic fundraising and the athletic fundraising? He said, well, we're going to get ours and good luck to everybody else on campus. That doesn't work here, you know. So we try to be donor centric in terms of letting our donors decide, but there's also, again, a sticking to your identity and who you are. I'm not trying to knock the one and done philosophies, but if we went that route, one and done meaning recruiting players who are going to stay a year and then go to the pros, I think a lot of our faculty would have had issues with that. You know, if we stopped graduating players, I think a lot of our faculty would have issues with that. So maintaining the culture on the athletics side gives those on the academic side more confidence that, hey, we're not going to lose our identity in the process. We're going to stay true to our roots. But ultimately, it's the leadership that has to decide, you know, that we're going to play in the same sandbox.
Perfect. Thank you. Eric, I'll turn it back over to you to wrap things up. I know there were a couple questions in the chat that we didn't get to. We'll make sure we follow up with some answers as well.
Oh, great. Yeah, you guys have a good rapport, Jerry and Graham. I can see how you must have really just bounce ideas off of each other really efficiently and proficiently. Yeah, Jerry, I love Boston. We've got some clients in Bedford, and my wife and I, our kids are Irish twins, so we've planned that they're going to graduate high school at the same time and go to school sometime in Boston, and we're going to follow them out there and get a rental for 4 years, just because Cambridge is so vibrant. The food out there is great. I did upscale Italian food for 10 years, so the Little Italy section of Boston, I love Boston. Great aquarium. I'm a big aquarium nerd, as you can see. Beautiful city. So again, Graham, thanks for bringing Jerry in. Congratulations on your success. What a great hour speech, guys. So next year, when you're celebrating your 1 millionth book sold, we can all get together and celebrate that again. So a donation we made in our speaker's name today, the Patachou Foundation. They addressed pervasive food insecurity around Indianapolis area, serving 1,200 plus youth a week. Please join us next week for Nate Feldman, CEO of the IBJ. And again, Graham asked that we remember these books are for sale. They've got books for sale. I think I bought a dozen for my Butler friends. And again, Jerry and Graham, thanks for your time. Thanks for everybody's time. And I look forward to seeing everybody next week. Meeting is adjourned.